You can hear me? Do we have, just to make absolutely sure, because these words are precious. I wouldn't want any excuse for them not to be heard, particularly outside these walls and over a very close nearby wall. They've no excuses. I hope that all the hearing aids are all turned up today. Thank you all for being here. My absolute respect to Chantal and to Voices of Faith for the courageous decision they took when confronted with the choice of having their conference continue in the Vatican, to make the decision that no woman's voice would be excluded on their watch. I absolutely salute your courage. Now let me try and repay it. The Israelites, under Joshua's command, not Joshua, who's here, but the other Joshua. Under Joshua's command, they circled Jericho's walls for 7 days. They blew trumpets and they shouted to make the walls fall down. We don't have trumpets, but we have voices, voices of faith. And we are here to shout, to bring down our church's walls of misogyny. We've been circling these walls for at least 55 years since John the 23rd's encyclical, Pacem in Terris, first pointed to the advancement of women as one of the most important signs of the times. Here's what he said. They are demanding, both in domestic and in public life, the rights and duties which belong to them as human persons. The long-standing inferiority complex of certain classes because of their economic, social status, sex, or position, and the corresponding superiority complex of other classes is rapidly becoming a thing of the past. At the Second Vatican Council, Archbishop Paul Hallinan of Atlanta warned his fellow bishops to stop perpetuating the secondary place accorded to women in the Church of the 20th century, and to avoid the Church becoming, in his words, a latecomer in their social, political, and economic development. The Second Vatican Council's decree, Apostolicam Actuositatem, said it was important that women, in their words, participate more widely in the various sectors of the Church's apostolate. The Church's very famous pastoral constitution, Gaudium et Spes, said that the elimination of discrimination based on gender was a priority. Paul VI even commissioned a now long forgotten study on women in church and society. Those of us who were youngsters then, we surely thought that the post-conciliar church was well on the way to full equality for our 600 million female members. And yes, it is true that since the Council, new roles and jobs have opened up to the laity, including women. But these have simply marginally increased the visibility of women in subordinate roles, including in the Curia. They have added nothing to their decision-making power or their voice, because visibility and voice are not the same thing. And visibility without voice can actually reinforce one's silence. Remarkably, since the Council, roles which were specifically designated as suitable for the laity have been deliberately closed to women. I find this just totally perplexing. The stable roles of acolyte and lector and the permanent diaconate have both been opened, but only to laymen. Why? Both laymen and laywomen can, of course, be temporary altar servers. But bishops under our canon law are allowed to ban female temporary altar servers in their diocese. And even where they permit them, individual pastors are permitted to ban them. Why? Back in 1976, we were told that the Church does not consider herself authorized to admit women to priestly ordination. This, of course, has served to lock women out of any significant role in the Church's leadership, doctrinal development, and authority structure, since these have all been historically reserved to or filtered through ordained men. Yet, in divine justice, it seems to me that the very fact of the permanent exclusion of women from priesthood and all its consequential exclusions, that very fact should have provoked the Church's hierarchy to insist on finding innovative ways, radical ways of including women's voices as of right, not in trickles of tokenism by careful tapping. Finding ways of involving them in the divinely instituted College of Bishops, in the man-made entities such as the College of Cardinals, the Synod of Bishops, Episcopal conferences, giving them voice there as of right. Just imagine this normative scenario. Imagine for a moment that as a result of this, the Pope decides to call a synod on women in the Church. Some chance. And 350 male celibates turn up to advise the Pope on what women really want. That is how ludicrous our Church has become, because that is our system. How long can the hierarchy sustain the credibility of a God who wants things this way, who wants a choice, wants a church where women are invisible and voiceless in church leadership, in legal and doctrinal discernment and decision-making, but actually are expected to do all the hard work that keeps the Church going from generation to generation? It was here, and it seems to me an extraordinary but very beautiful irony. It was here in this very hall in 1995 that Irish Jesuit theologian Father Jerry O'Hanlon put his finger on the underpinning systemic problem when he steered Decree 14 through the Jesuits' 34th General Congregation. It's a forgotten document, but I think today we'll just dust it down and use it to challenge a Jesuit Pope, a reforming Pope, to real practical action on behalf of women in the Catholic Church. This is what it says. We have been part of a civil and ecclesial tradition that has offended against women. And like many men, we have a tendency to convince ourselves that there is no problem. However, unwittingly, we have often contributed to a form of clericalism which has reinforced male domination with an ostensibly divine sanction. By making this declaration, we wish to react personally and collectively and do what we can to change this regrettable situation. Now, this regrettable situation arises because the Catholic Church has long since been a primary global carrier of the toxic virus of misogyny. Its leadership has never sought a cure for that virus, though the cure is freely available. Its name is equality. Down the 2,000-year highway of Christian history came the ethereal divine beauty of the Nativity, the cruel sacrifice of the crucifixion, the hallelujah of the resurrection, and the rallying cry that wakens me up and gets me through the day each day of the great commandment to love one another. But down that same highway came these man-made toxins of misogyny, of homophobia, to say nothing of shameful anti-Semitism, with their legacy of damaged and wasted lives and deeply embedded institutional dysfunction. The laws and cultures of many nations and faith systems were also, of course, deeply patriarchal and excluding of women. Many still are. But today the Catholic Church lags noticeably behind the world's advanced nations in the elimination of the discrimination against women. A disgrace for an organization which claims to have been created by God for love in the universe. Worse still, because the Catholic Church is, to quote Ban Ki-moon, the pulpit of the world, its overt patriarchalism acts as a very powerful brake on dismantling the architecture of homophobia and of misogyny wherever they are found in the world. There is an irony here, for education has been crucial to so many of us, to the advancement of women in the world. It has been a sine qua non. And for most of us, I imagine many of us here, the education which liberated us was provided by the church's frontline workers, those wonderful people, clerical and lay, who have done so much to lift men and women and children out of poverty, out of powerlessness, and into opportunity. And yet, isn't it paradoxical that it is the questioning voices of educated Catholic women and the courageous men, and in particular courageous priests, who have suffered in supporting them? These are the voices that the church hierarchy simply cannot cope with. They cannot cope with the voices of these educated Catholic women and scorn them rather than engage them in dialogue. The church, which so regularly criticizes the secular world for its failure to deliver across a range of human rights, has almost no culture of internal self-critiquing of itself. It has a hostility to internal criticism, which fosters, unfortunately, a blinkered servility, and which borders at times on institutional idolatry. Today, we challenge Pope Francis to develop a credible strategy for the inclusion of women as equals throughout the church root and branch, including in its decision-making. A strategy with targets, with pathways, with outcomes, regularly audited, independently audited. I noticed Cardinal Farrell said that women's progress in the church was a process. Well, we challenge them. Start the process. Get it going. Put the fuel in the engine. Hit the button. Because the failure to include women as equals has deprived the church of fresh and innovative discernment. It has consigned it to recycled thinking among a hermetically sealed, cozy male clerical elite, regrettably often flattered by carefully chosen token lay people, among them women. It has kept Christ out, and it has kept bigotry in. It has left the church flapping about awkwardly on one wing when God gave it two. Now, if you've ever seen a bird that's got a broken wing, it's a sad thing. can't get up, can't get elevation, can't get direction. That's the church. And that's the hierarchy. And what is worse, to be given two wings and to constantly use one of them to keep the other one down seems to me a rather ridiculous waste of energy. We are entitled to hold our church leaders to account for this and other egregious abuses of institutional power, and we will, because that's why we're here today. We insist on our right to hold them to account. At the start of his papacy, Pope Francis said, "We need to create still broader opportunities for a more incisive female presence in the church." These are words which, regrettably, I have to say, a church scholar described as evidence of Francis's magnanimity. Let us be very clear, at least let me be very clear. Women's right to equality in the church arises organically from divine justice. It does not and should not depend on ad hoc papal benevolence, magnanimity. It is our right. Pope Francis described female theologians as the strawberries on the cake. He was wrong, plain and simple. Women are the leaven in the cake. They are the primary handers-on of the faith to their children. In the Western world, the church's cake is not rising. The baton of faith is dropping. The cake cannot rise unless the leaven is working. Women are working away from the church in droves because those who are expected to be key influencers in their children's faith formation have no opportunity to be key influencers in the formation of their Catholic faith. That's no longer acceptable. Just 4 months ago, the Archbishop of Dublin, Diarmuid Martin, felt compelled to remark that the low standing of women in the Catholic Church is the most significant reason for the feeling of alienation towards the Church in Ireland today. Yet Pope Francis has said that women are more important than men because the Church is a woman. Holy Father, why not ask women if they feel more important than men in the Church? I certainly don't. I suspect many will answer that they experience the Church as a male bastion of patronizing platitudes, to which Pope Francis has added his own quota. John Paul II has written of the mystery of women. Talk to us as equals, and we will not be a mystery. Francis has said a deeper theology of women is needed. At last, something I can agree with Pope Francis on. Because God knows it would be hard to find a more shallow theology of women than the misogyny and codology dressed up as theology, which the magisterium currently hides behind. And yet, all the time, a deeper theology is staring us in the face. Doesn't require much digging to find it. Just look to Christ, the founder of our great Christian faith. John Paul II pointed out that we are heirs to a history which has conditioned us to a remarkable extent. In every time and place, this conditioning has been an obstacle to the progress of women. Transcending the established norms, he says, of his own culture, Jesus treated women with openness, respect, acceptance, and tenderness. And John Paul goes on, as we look to Christ, it is natural to ask ourselves how much of his message has been heard and acted upon. Why didn't he ask us that question? Because women are best qualified to answer it. And yet here we are. We are left to talk among ourselves. No church leader bothers to turn up, not just because we do not matter, but because their priestly formation prepares them to resist treating us as full equals. Back in this hall in 1995, the Jesuit congregation asked God for the grace of conversion from a patriarchal church to a church of equals, where women truly matter, because only that church is really worthy of Christ. And only such a church can credibly make Christ matter. The time for that church is now, Pope Francis. The time for change is now. Let me just finish with a line that might be familiar to you from a very famous Irish poet. And it's so often used in the context of the Irish peace process, but it seems to me so relevant here today. It's from Seamus Heaney's Cure at Troy, where he says, that history says, do not hope this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. The tidal wave is quickly approaching the Vatican walls. Many, many thanks.